Well, a very warm welcome back to Talk Norwich City. It's Jack Reeve, joined alongside PinkUn journalist Connor Southwell to dissect everything that's happened with Norwich City over the last few months. We've made this somewhat of a tradition this season to catch up regularly throughout the campaign, more for our sake, I think, Connor, to chat things through and make sure we're both staying sane in a turbulent world of Norwich City this season. We are pretty much slap bang in the middle of January, and we know how busy the festive period into January is. How's it been for you over the last 6 weeks? Have you caught your breath yet?
Yeah, well, to be fair, it's only in sort of like the last fortnight, I think, where you've had we've had a few sort of spare weeks, I guess, with games on weekends. That makes life a little bit easier. Although that's ending this weekend with obviously Sheffield United, then a nice trip to Leeds. So yeah, we've had a little bit of a break to sort of decompress and digest everything that's happened in the last few weeks, and yeah, ready to go for the second half of January with games and transfers and all of the fun that comes around those things.
We'll have a look back before we look forwards. I'm going to try and put off talking about Sheffield United and Leeds for as much of this as possible, and maybe we can just glide over it towards the end. I mean, all in all, it was a fairly successful festive period for Norwich City. And I know you've mentioned it in your various podcasts and columns, Connor, on the PinkUn, that Norwich City have a balancing act to kind of to create here in terms of short-term progress mixed in with, the buzzword that we all love to throw around of transition, and balancing that is going to be difficult. So I suspect that festive period, it was it 10 points from a possible 12, will be a relief for those within Carrow Road at the moment.
Yeah, definitely, particularly given it was what, about 3 wins in 14, I think, prior to that, and that's the sort of run that begins to, see people ask questions, rightly so. That's what football is about, because you can talk about how great you're going to be in 3 years, but you have to win games in the here and now, and enough of them. And yeah, really good period. Not just, I think, the results, but the performances and the underlying numbers. Actually, even though the results have been a little bit inconsistent, there's various reasons within that. The underlying numbers now are much better compared to where they were at the start of the season. So it does feel like, even maybe though results haven't been as consistent as Norwich City would have liked, there is now, I think, sort of evidence blossoming that Johannes Ofure is beginning to improve Norwich City as a collective, and individuals within that as well. So, of course, looking at that long-term picture, that's very positive. But in the short-term period, this has been a really important one to, I guess, push them a little bit closer to where they want to be. They'd lost a lot of ground because of injuries, because of form, and it's pushed them sort of up towards where they want to be in terms of the table. So yeah, you're right. Every win, I think, is basically a little bit more credit in the bank for the long term, to be able to build that, a little bit of room for manoeuvre. And that's the important thing of what this festive period has created. But hopefully some momentum now, which it feels like their season hasn't really had. It's been almost one step forward, 2 steps back, and it's felt like that constant progress, which of course, as the old saying goes, you're still moving forward if that's the case, but it's been a little bit slower than I think we all would have liked. So yeah, obviously it's frustrating that the next 2 games are the next 2 games, and the fixture list hasn't been kind to them in that regard. But a really good opportunity, I think, to see where they are, and to see whether this festive burst was just another good run, or whether it can be something a little bit more sustained.
It feels like you mentioned that stat. Was it 3 wins in 14 in that pretty horrid period? I know there was context around injuries and suspensions, but that doesn't feel like it goes hand in hand with the fact that Norwich City are 4 points off 6th place. But that's where they find themselves. And was listening to some various EFL podcasts this morning, and there's, I think, from neutrals and those looking in, there's excitement around what the potential is from this Norwich side. And you've said there, the underlying numbers have looked good, and that will only get you so far. But it feels like the systems and the kind of philosophy that Johannes and his various coaching staff are implementing are sustainable, and they're moving the needle in the right direction.
Yeah, absolutely, and that was always going to take time, because part of it is down to churning the squad and getting players in that you want to do. But we're seeing now, I think, a real continuity in terms of what Norwich are doing. They, on average, not in every game, because the next 2 games probably won't be the case, but on average in Championship games, in the last couple of months or so, they've created more chances than they've conceded, and that is the very simple equation that you need to achieve to win football games. Then, of course, it comes down to whether individuals can show composure in front of goal, and whether you can keep them out at the other end. But I think it shows a general sort of direction of travel that is positive, and should be encouraging, and that's probably been reflective in the festive period. I probably feel like Norwich don't have as many points as perhaps they should do, and as perhaps their performances have warranted at points. But as you say, there's reasons for that. You can be as good as you want defensively, but if you can't defend a corner, or your concentration, or there's a switch off, then you're going to give yourselves a mountain to climb in games, particularly in championship games that swing so quickly. And of course, it could have been really different if that Coventry game, if Emmanuel Forson hadn't have come on, and if that hadn't have happened, then perhaps we look at the festive period a little bit different. So sometimes there's luck to all of this as well. You can be as data driven and as long term as you want, but sometimes you do just need a little bit of a rub of the green, which maybe it feels like they haven't had at various points of this season. And yeah, as we're sort of again talking before the weekend and before the press conference about injuries, maybe they've lost that a little bit again already. So yeah, it's interesting, but I genuinely feel quite optimistic about where they are. And I listen to the same podcast as you, and I think Ali Maxwell on the very good, not the top 20 pod, was I think he tipped Norwich for the playoffs, which is bold. But the comment that I completely agreed with was the fact that you look at the teams around them. When Norwich are at their best, I think they've got a higher ceiling than all of them. I think that comment is right, but he's also right in that when they don't play well, they've got a lower floor than all of them as well. And so if they can bring that level of performance up when they're off it slightly, then I think there is evidence there that they could be a good team. And ultimately that is done by ensuring that you are solid and ensuring that you don't concede too many chances, because then if you're not creating as much, hopefully it doesn't cost you quite as much. So that to me feels like the plan, but I think the overall direction of travel is positive. I mean, they've got 1 point, and I think they're 2 places higher than they were at this stage last season, and we know how they went on to do. So yeah, I wouldn't necessarily completely write off the top 6, but clearly I think for where Norwich City want to go, the objective is probably a little bit bigger than that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's too outrageous to put us up for top 6, considering as you kind of mentioned there, when Norwich are good and when Johannes has got near enough a full strength starting 11, like we can blow teams away. It's going to take reinforcements though, I think, to get us over the line, if we will get there. We are in the middle of the January transfer window. Trading is very much underway. A couple of ins, a couple of outs, hopefully some more to come. I guess the headline that hasn't been confirmed as of yet, but it looks to be moving in the right direction, if that is that of Jurasek, who's looks to be an exciting young winger in an area where Norwich need numbers and need quality. It sounds as if, Connor, from kind of reading your reporting and various other outlets, that this has been a name that Norwich have been tracking for a while, and I assume will be very excited to hopefully get done.
Yeah, they've done a lot of work on him, spanning a significant period of time. And I know what it's like for supporters that when something like this happens and you read about fees being agreed and all of that type of thing, that it can feel like it's limping on. I think it's probably quite rare for interest to be picked up quite as early as it was. I think it was Christmas Day, the first report that Norwich City were interested in Mateo Jurasek. So from there, you get every twist and turn that ordinarily you don't get, when perhaps primarily and I know how these things work ordinarily. You tend to pick up on deals and signings sort of later on at the stages, so sort of medical stage and in the final sort of stages where more people know about them for various sort of reasons and whatnot. So it is quite rare for something to be picked up as early as this has, and just because the two clubs have agreed a number and they've agreed what Norwich should pay, then you have to work out how you're going to pay it, how over how long and what structure, and then there's a player to sort and an agent to sort and a medical to sort, and yeah, all of that takes time. So I think that's probably why we're where we are, even though perhaps the numbers have been, there's been a handshake on the numbers. But you're right, I think he's a talent, and you look at him and he fits what Norwich are trying to do in terms of someone who maybe had a burst of really good form earlier on in their career, but for whatever reason has slightly lost their way, hasn't played as much football, but a recognised international, went to the Euros with the Czech Republic, played a lot of sort of high level football in terms of European and obviously in the Czech league as well. Slavia are currently leading that league. So the pedigree is there. That's the type of player that Norwich want to recruit, but there's clearly going to be some rawness about him, and there's the intangible elements of how do they adapt to England, how quickly can they get going, and that's why I think they want to get this done this month, because it would expose Jurasek to what, 4 or 5 months or so of championship football, really good block of games, plus then a pre-season to then attack next season. And if we think about that position, it's been a little bit problematic for Norwich generally since Jonathan Rowe left, and we could have a whole nother debate around that and maybe how it's gone for both parties. But it's hard to reflect on that as anything other than a shame. But the fact that Oscar Schwartau, who 18 years old, I think he's done a pretty good job on that right wing. But he's not a winger. He's seen as a central option. So Norwich need one. Sienats clearly has been playing up front as well. He's been exposed to a lot of minutes. He looks tired to me, to be honest. And I'm sure Josh Sargent's return will help him out. So there is a little bit of a hole in the squad there. And I think that the type of profile that Jurasek is, in terms of quite direct, quite pacey, likes to invert onto that left foot from the right. Those are all things that fit with what Johannes Hoftorp wants to do. So there's that alignment, I guess, of thinking between the recruitment that Norwich City are trying to do compared to how they play. And that, again, should be positive. Whether it's a success, who knows? Because as we know, there's so many elements to recruitment that is really difficult and hard to predict. And you can do all of your science and all of your background checks and have a dossier of references, and it can still go wrong. So then part of it is down to luck. But yeah, they've put in a lot of work onto him, and hopefully in the coming days, weeks, he will be a Norwich City player.
Well, we look at, you mentioned there Ante Sienats and the kind of price tag that was involved with him, and I actually think Sienats for the most part this season has looked promising and will probably come good. But will there become a pressure with these types of signings that they maybe just need to work now rather than a signing for a year or two down the line? I mean, we've seen it in the past, haven't we, with whether it's sort of Milo Rashica or Christos Zolis that come to mind. If you dig down, actually quite good players, but for whatever reason didn't work. It feels like we are maybe approaching, and maybe it's slightly harsh to say, but a point where these signings have to start working if you're laying out £7 million for a player, which is, whether you like it or not, a chunky amount for a championship team.
Yeah, that's completely fair. I think from a fan's perspective to see it that way, and it's hard for these players. I think particularly when they're young men. Ante Sienats wasn't 21 when he joined Norwich, and he's got a price tag like that on his head. And I remember speaking to him after one of the games that he scored in relatively recently, and he kind of admitted that it's sort of weighed on his shoulders a little bit. And I can imagine it's difficult because that's just in the jobs that we're both in. If you walk around and someone was willing to pay £10 million to have you work there, that's going to create a pressure, and you're going to put a pressure on yourself. So Norwich have to do a job, I guess, to try and break that sort of mental aspect. And they've obviously got psychologists, and they'll have other elements working with these players. But it's also, I think, about communicating to their fan base and probably to the wider world that actually, yes, Ante Sienats, £8.5 million is a big sum of money to spend on a player, particularly for a championship club. But it's about an investment, and it's about an investment over a period of time. And look, clearly not everyone wants to hear that because they see figures and they expect someone to be ready to hit the ground running, to score goals instantly. But actually what you're paying for there is potential. You're paying for the odds that they go on to do really well. It's not for where they're at now. So that, I guess, is about perception. It's really hard to break that in football. I think it's maybe one of the only industries where people go for big sums of money like that and they get judged in that way. So it feels to me increasingly like what we're seeing is an ownership group and a strategy that is prepared to pay money and reasonable money as well. There's no disputing that for a player, probably every window that fits and aligns with their strategy, and the rest is obviously in keeping with the way that Norwich City would ordinarily recruit in terms of their self-financing element of it. And this is where I think deals like Slimani are so good, because you can't sign £8 million players in every position. You need players who are cheap and can fill a hole and can do a very good job, so that those guys who you spend money on, who have high ceilings but maybe aren't quite there yet, when they do explode, then you've got players there who can still make you competitive in the short term, which probably links back to the point we were speaking about. So yeah, look, it's a reasonable expectation for fans to have. But it's up to the club to try and break that and to try and communicate that these guys are investments for 2-3 years, and it's about seeing value in that time, not about seeing value in the first 6 months. And that is obviously the element that is hard for supporters, because we're all football fans, we're all impatient, we all want our team to win, and we want them to win tomorrow. We don't care about 2 years' time. So when you're not doing that, there's more scrutiny. But yeah, I think with Sienats in particular, you can see the raw materials there. And I remember a very similar debate around Josh Sargent at the time, and a lot of people saying, was he worth the money that Norwich City paid? The reality is, particularly with strikers, if they score goals and score enough of them in a burst, you get good money for them. Adam Eder proved that. That is what you pay for strikers, unfortunately, and that's probably more a reality of where the game is at rather than perhaps where Ante Sienats is at.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's stick in those kind of wide attacking areas. It feels like there's been huge kind of churn over the last few weeks. Christian Fastnacht's left. Kay Gordon's gone back to Liverpool. Lewis Dobbin has come in. We're obviously talking about Eurosec. There's a lengthy suspension over Boy Science's his head. I mean, let's talk about Boy Science, Connor, because I mean, talk about going from kind of hero to zero within a pretty quick space of time. And I wouldn't say your opinion was controversial, but it was probably against the norm in terms of. I remember you saying that despite the goals, you actually think his performance levels haven't maybe been where they'd like to be, and I would agree. Like, his goal scoring has been sensational, and he's kind of created goal scoring opportunities from areas that you wouldn't expect, but his overall game maybe isn't as mature as you need to get some of the big moves that he's been touted with. You couple that with his clear disciplinary issues, and this isn't an isolated issue. We've seen him sent off before. We've seen him caught up in slight tussles, and part of me wants to say, well, that's just part of the risk of a player like Borja, and it was the same with Buendia, and we'll have more along the line. And part of me says, has he learned from the lessons that we hoped he would before? I mean, where are you at with Borja at the moment? Because at 1 point 6 weeks ago, it looked an absolute nailed on certainty that he would get a big money move this summer. And suddenly you're looking at him going, maybe this is actually an issue for Norwich, because they're now not going to be able to attract the fee and the price that they maybe would have liked to have done.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting discussion, because again, maybe links to what we spoke about previously, is that similarly to price tags, people look at goals, and if you score 15 goals, then automatically you're brilliant, and there aren't any areas to improve. And look, I've been some of the games where he scored some vital goals for Norwich City that have got them points, and in the bigger picture, in terms of building some of that short-term credit in the bank, it's been so important because it's translated into points. But I found myself getting quite frustrated with him, I think, and that's not because he's made wrong decisions. I think you can forgive stuff like that, or even to an extent, the disciplinary issues, which clearly are unacceptable, but I think they're fixable. For me, it's more because I see the talent that he's got, and I think you can see that when he pops one in from 25 yards pretty seamlessly and pretty without any fuss. And I just think he could be so much better than he is at this moment in time. And I think that's probably where the frustration stems from. I think from my perspective, if he wants to play at the top level, he's got to become more creative in games. He's got to do more than just score goals. I go back to kind of the season a few years ago, a bit of an odd comparison, but Todd Cantwell, when he scored all those goals in the Premier League, wasn't really in games enough, wasn't really creating enough. And then you looked at Emi Buendia, who was probably the opposite, was creating enough, but wasn't really scoring. You need to do both, I think. And, you look at someone like Gabriel Sara last season, who did that, and they got themselves that big move. Clubs look for it. They look for the creative aspects. They look for what you do beyond goals, because players can go through purple patches of form. And I think what Norwich have done this year, which has made him a lot better in front of goal, really, is pushing his position up, getting him higher up the pitch, getting him receiving the ball in better areas, and obviously cutting inside on that right foot. I think the elements for him that are coachable are the defensive aspects massively. I think he leaves his left back pretty exposed at points. And again, you talk about taking the step up. You've got to be good at that sort of Premier League level. So I don't think the goal scoring from range is going to be enough to get him maybe the level of move that perhaps his numbers feel like he should get. He needs to show a little bit more. And so that frustration from my perspective is because I see the potential that's there, and I'm not quite sure that he is where he could be in terms of that. And there's clearly a coaching factor of that as well. And you would hope that Johannes Ofure, who has a very good record historically of working with wide players and getting them into a position where they're very good to go on and command really good fees, can help him with that. And I think we have seen some improvement. But, I'm sure, as Johannes said as well in the last press conference, that for him it's been difficult as well, because you go from where he's been, where he was, not a squad player. He was a good player for Norwich City last year, but he's become the player for Norwich City this season. And that is a huge step to take in terms of mindset and mentality, particularly at such a young age, to get your head around. So it creates a pressure. Teams have tripled up on him at points. I've seen it. They employ the dark arts. They kick and because they know they can provoke, and that again will come with maturity. So I still see a player that there's so much more development in, and I think probably needs to find a little bit more to get himself to that next level. So look, football doesn't work like this. I'd love him to stay at Norwich for an extra year to try and get himself to those levels, because I don't think he's a million miles away. And if he can do that, then he will get himself the type of move that I think he wants and that certainly his goal scoring deserves. But he won't do that, I think, on his ability to shoot from range and that alone.
Yeah, there's certainly gears to shift through with Borja, and let's hope he does that within the next kind of few months at Norwich City, because that would be incredibly exciting. Lewis Dobbin, we'll maybe talk about in another video. I must say, I've been fairly impressed with some of the glimpses I've seen of him. I thought he was bright against Brighton, particularly in that first half. Just looking ahead to kind of the second half of this January transfer window, Connor, Eurosec obviously looks likely and may well have been made permanent before we get this video out. Are you expecting much else in terms of incomings and also outgoings in the next kind of 16 days?
Probably not permanently, I would say, in terms of incomings. Like we all know what windows are like. Go back to the summer and who would have predicted the events that kicked off to have kicked off. So you can never 100% or say with 100% certainty, but certainly at this moment in time, it doesn't feel like we're going to be seeing much more sort of incoming on a permanent basis after Eurosec. I think, could we see loans? Possibly. How many? I'm not sure. Part of it obviously will depend on how significant that Marcelino Nunez injury is and whether they feel they're a little bit light in that area. But I could see, if it is weeks rather than months, that, you know, a couple of weeks' time you get Slimani back. You know, Gabe Forsyth is pretty close. That maybe you could muddle through until he came back. Probably wouldn't be my preferred route, but I could see an argument for doing that.
Sorry to didn't Johannes mention in one of the kind of interviews that you'd done with him that he wanted a kind of a deep lying midfielder? Yeah. And I've not seen any links with any player like that yet. Will that be something that is priority over the next few weeks?
I think that's more long-term thinking, summer-wise. I think there's clearly going to be a need for a six. I think I probably said it on one of these videos. I think it was one of the, not major errors, that's a bit strong, but I think it's maybe one of the blind spots that Norwich City left in the summer, that they didn't have anyone that can really fill in for Kenny McLean in the same way. I think actually what they found is that Nunez can do it pretty well as a six, and we've seen that. So maybe that sort of alleviated the pressure on that. But whilst McLean was out, they really struggled for any sort of momentum or rhythm in terms of another option in that area of the pitch. And you know, they wanted Jonathan Varane last January. They got very close to doing that deal, but the numbers didn't quite add up. So I'm sure it's long term on their list, but there's no noises that that's going to be addressed this month. There was some chatter around the goalkeeper, sort of in the very early bits of the window, but again, I don't really see that at this stage. So I think, again, we're maybe looking at any potential loan options, whether that's a midfielder. I don't think they're going to do a striker by all accounts. So potentially another winger. I'm not quite sure. So yeah, I don't see a huge amount happening at this stage, but of course you can never really write it off, because as we know, players can kick off and put in transfer requests and decide they don't want to play and all sorts. So that's very much as things stand.
I think I think we can all agree that when everyone is fit, you know, we have the tools in our kind of armory to be able to challenge with anyone in this division. I mean, we've seen us draw with Leeds at home and Sheffield United. We should have got something against Burnley. It worries me slightly, Connor, that you kind of I'm not saying that this is a passive approach to the transfer window, but we know that we need another striker. We know that we need a deep lying midfielder. We probably need another goalkeeper. The fact that Norwich are willing to wait until the summer, and look, they probably will be able to extract better value, and maybe targets that they want aren't available until the summer. But it feels as if they're almost going, well, let's hope for the best for the rest of this season, and maybe, you know, we know where our weaknesses are, and we're kind of okay to go to battle, you know, exposed in those areas. Do you get the same impression?
Yeah, I think it's tough, because do you go out and do you just sign anyone and you sign the wrong one, or do you wait and make sure you get the right one? I think they're probably now of a mind where previously it hasn't been the case, and they've been much more willing to probably fill holes in the short term. And look, they did that last January, right? They brought in Sidney Van Hooijdonk. He didn't get a kick. They didn't get a kick, and we all know how that transfer went. So it doesn't always work just to sign someone for the sake of signing someone. And they've got to be the right one. But yeah, I think in certain areas Norwich's squad is short. I agree with you. I think the lack of a real proper six is I mean, that's a historic issue at Norwich City that goes back really to the summer that Skip and Tetty left. They've never signed anyone to fulfill that role, albeit I know Johannes plays in a slightly different way. I still think they could use another 8, another sort of midfielder. And yeah, I'm with you. Clearly, there's going to be a goalkeeping situation to address in the summer as well. So, yeah, maybe it's a case of waiting, and then once in the summer there's another cycle of out of contract players that frees up a bit more wages and money to play around with. There are obviously players who are out of contract. Clubs are a little bit more willing to do deals at that time of year. So, yeah, I can maybe understand why you would wait in some areas. I can kind of understand why they're not doing a striker. But yeah, I can understand it because, again, it goes back probably to the start of this conversation where if you're a fan, you just want to see everything chucked at trying to get in the playoffs. Yeah. But and this is where probably there's an adjustment needed in terms of where Norwich are at, where this is probably a bigger build and a bigger thing than just getting in the top 6 this year. Because the thing is, if you get in the top 6 and as per last year, you lose in the semi-final over 2 legs, well, you're in the championship again next season. So you have to probably build for 2 years and 3 years to be better than that and to improve the squad gradually and to get it to a stage where it looks a little bit more developed and a little bit more better. And of course, it took a whole year for that to happen under Stuart Webber and Daniel Farke. It might take longer this time around because of sort of I don't want to say mess, because again, that's a bit strong, but because of where the squad is at with players on, there's a big disparity in terms of what some of the players are on compared to maybe what some of the newer ones are on, and getting everyone into that cycle is difficult. So it takes time, it takes windows, and it takes a little bit of patience, unfortunately. So, yeah, I can understand why they wouldn't do anything rather than just doing something for the sake of doing something. But yeah, you clearly have to message that right, and it's about getting that messaging right. And to be fair, I think they've probably been a lot better at that this season than perhaps they were last year.
I think I'm constantly in kind of split minds about how you approach this. I think the sensible approach is, as you've outlined there, you're patient and you wait for the targets you really want to come available and go in a gradual process. The other part of me goes, well, if you wait, you then end up creating more issues. You know, Borja Sainz ends up leaving. Josh Sargent might be moved away. Marcelino Nunes is probably going to get a move. Angus Gunn's going to be out of the door. And suddenly you've gone from needing a central defensive midfielder and a number 8 to needing 7 new starting players because you've had to wait. So, yeah, we shall see. It's going to be a fascinating end to this transfer window. I mean, I think you've stayed fairly, consistent with your projections of where this squad is at. I mean, has that changed throughout the season? What are you expecting from, I guess, the business end now as we approach kind of February and onwards?
I'm expecting Norwich to be better, be a little bit more consistent. But I still think some of the issues that we've seen will be there all season, really, in terms of some of the maybe issues with putting together a 90-minute performance at this stage for the reasons that we've discussed. Because it feels to me at the moment like you go to a position where Norwich are making subs and they're bringing on players that just aren't. And it's not a quality point, it's a profile point. They're not in the right profile to carry out what they want to do. So naturally, as games get older and you make changes, Norwich's performance gets worse because you don't have that 11 that can carry out what you want to do, which probably feeds onto your point that you were saying there. So look, I don't think this is a team that will get in the playoffs. I really hope to be wrong on that because it would be excellent. And there's definitely an opportunity to do that if, as we discussed, they can consistently find their high ceiling and that upper level of performance that we've seen. I think they've got a really good, favourable run of Carrow Road fixtures. You look at the run that they've got until now and the end of the season, pretty similar to last year. I think a lot of them are gettable in terms of points, and it's not given, but they will sense an opportunity from that perspective. And if you can get a slight uptick in the away form, then hey, who knows? It's possible because as Norwich proved last season, you don't need to be that good away from home, and you can still sneak in. So I personally feel it will be beyond them because of the issues that we've mentioned. It's a shame from my perspective and probably everyone's perspective, really, that we haven't seen more of. It feels like every time they begin to get an opening where they can have McLean, Nunez, Sainz, Sargent all fit, that breaks down somehow. And obviously Sainz gets a 6-game ban and Nunez is potentially looking at a period out. So that's a little bit frustrating. But if they can as quick as possible get that 4 into their side, then look, anything's possible, I think. And completely write them off, but my feeling is it will be a season hopefully where they can show gradual improvement and hopefully finish inside the top 10. If they can do that, I think it will have been a really successful first year under Johannes Torup.
There we go. Half an hour of Norwich City chatter done. I think we could have gone on for another few hours. It's never simple at Norwich City. It's never dull. The PinkUn are across absolutely everything. The coverage has been superb this season. So head over there if you're looking for more Norwich City content. I'm sure we will be back very soon, chatting, Connor. Hopefully, again, Norwich City will be on the up, and plenty more content coming out on TNC over the next few weeks and months. So stay locked in, and we will see you all again very soon. Bye-bye.